During its early history, most Russians had little or no access to qualified medical care, but relied on traditional folk and herb remedies. Ancient Russia got more shape and became Kievan Rus in the second half of the 9th century. Many monasteries were established, and some functioned as centers of education and offered basic medical care. People could also turn to folk healers for rudimentary medical care. Family fathers exercised home medicine and knew how to treat sores and burns proficient with ointments. An overlap exists between instruments used for domestic, cosmetic, and surgical purposes. In 1223, from the Far East, the Mongols, under the leadership of Genghis Khan, invaded Kievan Rus, cut off the principality for the rest of Europe. The Mongolian yoke lasted for almost 250 years, but showed cracks over time. In 1481, the Principality of Moscow, with the capital Moscow, was able to take over the lead. In 1613, the first Romanov Tsar, Mikhail Fedorovich, ascended the throne, and a time of new medical development dawned. He instituted improvements in social welfare and healthcare. In 1620, Mikhail Fedorovich established the Aptekersky Prikaz, Ministry of Pharmacy in Moscow, and ushered in the birth of scientific medicine in Russia. Around in 1654, the Prikaz opened the first medical school, where court physicians and foreign doctor medicine trained barber surgeons. Instruction includes surgery, anatomy, pharmacology, a practical diagnosis of international disease, and ambulatory medicine. Correspondingly, in Netherlands, more or less the same development took place. The Dutch lived among the nobility and clergy. The nobility did not promote any scientific practice of medicine. Library or some monasteries contained medical books. In 1575, Prince Tenholder William the Silent founded the University of Leiden, the first and now oldest university. Leiden University was open to all students, irrespective of race, nationality, or religion. It became famous for its anatomical and medical school. Even Tsar Peter the Great was aware of that. Peter the Great in 1682 became the Tsar of Russia at a very young age of 10 years and wanted to take his country out of isolation and transfer it into a modern civilization. He knew he had to travel to Europe to develop his visions and ideas. During 1697-1698, Peter made his first visit to Europe with the Grand Embassy. As a teenager, Peter had many friends in Nemetskaya Sloboda, the forest area in Moscow. Peter's closest friends were two Dutch families, court physicians. They were his first teachers of theoretical and practical medicine. Together with other Dutch people, they taught him Dutch. Perhaps that is why Peter considered King Stenholder William III as his hero. In October 1697, Tsar Peter visited for the first time Leiden University. He was very interested in the establishment and laws of this university, its botanical garden and anatomical theater. He met with Govard Bidlu, president of the board of directors, record magnificus of the university, and his colleagues in the St. Chamber. Govard Bidlu was professor in anatomy, court physician of King Stenholder William III, and the head of medical service of the army. The board of directors present him with a Latin general description of everything concerning the university. He also obtained the anatomical atlas of Govard Bidlu and Andreas Vesalius. He also came into possession of one of the two original color engravings of the anatomical theater in Leiden. Bartolomeo Dolento made the engraving after a painting by Jean Cornel Rudens. 1609, this engraving can now be admired in the Military Medical Academy named SM Kirov. In April 1698, after his return from England, he paid tribute to William the Silent, the founder of Leiden University, during a visit to his tomb in Delft. Then, on his way back to Amsterdam, he again visited the Anatomical Theatre and the Botanical Garden of Leiden University. Peter spent most of his time in Amsterdam and visited more than once the anatomist Frederick Rusch. Frederick Rusch was a graduate of the Leiden University and a famous anatomist, zoologist, and botanist. He became famous for his preservation of anatomical specimens. He became Peter's second teacher in medicine and taught him to carry out bloodletting, surgical incisions, suture wounds, extractives, and perform post-mortems. Jan van Eyck painted the anatomy lesson of Dr. Frederick Rusch in approximately 1683. Since 1672, Rusch had perfected the preparation technique of anatomical specimens and blood vessels by injecting dyes and resins. He invented an original way of embalming corpses. He created the first anatomical museum in Amsterdam. Frederick Rusch has completed several thesauri about his preserved preparations. Peter the Great greatly admired the anatomical specimens of humans and animals of his visits to the museums. In 1698, he obtained his first collection of anatomical and zoological specimens. The anatomical objects are known as the small private collection of 26 dry and wet human specimens. These two first collections became part of the Aptekarski Prikaz in Moscow, awaiting the settlement of the Prikaz in St. Petersburg since 1703, the new capital. In 1798, these small collections were transferred from the Medicinski Collegia to the Imperial Medical Surgical Academy, now the Military Medical Academy named S.M. Kirov in St. Petersburg. When Tsar Peter visited the citadel, he met with Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He was allowed to look through his microscope and saw such tiny objects. He was so fascinated that he took one of the microscopes back with him to Russia. A practical concern for Peter was the purchase of drugs, herbs, and medical instruments. In March 1698, the Amsterdam merchant Walter Fulton received a substantial sum for medical instruments specially made for the Tsar. These instruments were transported to Moscow by the physician Alpha Penders. Especially for his court physicians and other barber surgeons, he purchased medical instruments in the Netherlands and Great Britain. The Dutch admired Cornelis Croix in service of the Tsar, together with Johann Termant, his Dutch court physician, were responsible for purchasing drugs and medical devices for the army. The Dutch merchant Christopher Brandt was responsible for the delivery to Moscow. In May 1698, the Tsar bought a small travel pharmacy in Amsterdam for 15 gold ducats, and drugs for the pharmacy had the golden goal. At Peter's request, his travel pharmacy was delivered to him at the Dutch East Indian Company's shipyard. Tsar Peter's small first oldest collection of Rusch anatomical and zoological specimens is sent by the ship of the East Indian Company, Peter and Paul, to Russia. After arriving in Russia, the small collection of Rusch specimens was handed over the Apraksin Prikaz in Moscow for education purposes. From 1700 to 1721, Russia was at war with Sweden to obtain access to the Baltic Sea. In 1703, Russian troops made their way to the Finnish Gulf. In the same year that Peter the Great started to build his new capital, St. Petersburg. In 1704, he also starts to build his small palace, which he named Montplaisir. Along the lines of Dutch technology, he laid out the Dutch garden, fountains, and a canal. In the Garden Petergof Palace, which was built later, Peter convened his study having in mind some feature of the Dutch style. This room is decorated with carved oak panels and therefore bears the name the Oak Study. Since his childhood, he was taught in medicine and during lifetime he had several different teachers. He was a good barber surgeon. Sir Peter, who needed a new court physician, invited Nicholas Lambertus Bidloo, a graduate and doctor of medicine, like a PhD title of Leiden University. Bidloo accepted the offer and started his work in Russia in 1702. His father, Lambert Bidloo, was a pharmacist in Amsterdam. Govert Bidloo, Rector Magnificus of Leiden University, was his uncle and brother of his father. Peter, together with Nicholas Bidloo, founded the first medical surgical school with a hospital, anatomical theater, and a botanical garden in Moscow. This school, designed by Bidloo, worked along the lines of Leiden University, both theoretically and practically, and was officially opened in 1707. In 1710, Bidloo finished a handwritten instruction in Latin for his students to study surgery. As a scientific publication, it is the first and original textbook for higher medical education in Russia. In 1712, Peter moved most of Aptekarski Prikaz, now Aptekarskaya Kancelaria, from Moscow to his summer palace in his new capital, St. Petersburg, including Rustich's small collection and his private library. In 1716-1717, Emperor Peter I traveled with his second grand embassy through Europe, including France and the Netherlands. He visited Leiden University and met with the rector Magnificus Hermann Berghoff and the board of directors. In addition to his position as rector Magnificus, Hermann Berghoff was professor of medicine, botany, and chemistry. Peter, together with Hermann Berghoff, visited all Leiden factories located around Leiden University at the Rothenburg and the most medical instruments markets. He had interesting, detailed conversation with manufacturers, masters of instruments, and with medical scientists of Leiden University. Together, they visit Cassilia Guest House, where Berghoff taught medicine at the bedside of patients. The Cassilia Guest House is now State Museum. Berghoff, where a replica of the Leiden Anatomical Theater has been preserved. Peter the Great wanted his own museum with curiosity. During his second grand embassy in 1717, when was given a chance, he bought the famous Ruisch collection of anatomical preparations for his new Kunstkammer. In 1716, the Tsar bought also the natural historical collection of the apothecary Albert Siba. When the two large new collections of Ruisch and Siba arrived, the summer palace seemed too small. Peter decided to exhibit temporarily this collection in the Kikin Maison, one of the oldest buildings in St. Petersburg. The grand opening of the first Kunstkammer took place in 1719. After his second grand embassy to Europe, Peter the Great established the Imperial Academy of Science in St. Petersburg. He therefore constructed a new building. Peter's idea for the academy was that its function as a scientific but also as an educational institute. The opening took place in 1726. Peter donated his library and the Kunstkammer, including the second collection of Friedrich Ruisch and Albert Seba, to the Imperial Academy of Science. Nowadays, the second Kunstkammer is known as Kunstkammer Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography. Laurentus Laurentovich Blumenstrauss became the first president of the Imperial Academy of Science in St. Petersburg. He was a graduate of the Leiden University. The Tsar bought in 1716 the natural historical collection of the apothecary Albert Seba for the amount of 15,000 Deutsche guilds. It contained 340 jars with animal kept in liquid, quantity of fish and other sea products, and without counting a collection of several artificial and curious pieces. Nowadays, the natural historical collection of Siba can be admired in the Zoological Museum in St. Petersburg. Empress Elizabeth I, daughter of Peter the Great, issued in 1756, allowed that only doctors who had passed a qualified exam and had been officially registered by Medicinska Kancellaria were allowed to practice medicine. Now it was expressly forbidden to provide any oral drugs without the signature of a qualified doctor. The Kancellaria also distinguished between scientifically trained foreign doctors, doctor medicine, and empirically trained doctors, barber surgeons. This reflects in their salaries. Mikhail Lomonosov was a professor of chemistry and a member of the Imperial Academy of Science. In 1754, he developed a project for the establishment of the first university in Russia. In his proposal, he outlined the university structure and curriculum. Elizabeth took the advice of Mikhail Lomonosov, and on the 24th of January 1755, the order for its creation was issued. The Netherlands, and especially the Dutch Leiden University, play a significant role in the development of healthcare and medical education in the 18th century. 4 of its graduates became ministers of healthcare: Robert Erkins, Ivan Deotis, Blumentrost, Herman Kaya Berhavi, and Pavel Hondont. The latter succeeded the Dutchman Herman Kaya Berhove, a nephew of Herman Berhove. Students from the Bydlo School, the University of the Academy of Science, and the Moscow University came to Leiden University, obtained their PhD degree. Thus far, about 46 students of Russian descent or Russians of foreign descent were found. Empress Catherine the Great institutionalized healthcare even more, and Russia became increasingly self-sufficient in trained medical professions. In 1775, a provincial medical charitable council were created in all provinces of the Russian Empire. After the death of Empress Catherine, her son Paul I reigned 1796-1801, and then his both sons, Alexander I and Nicholas I, reigned 1825-1855, continued the reform of their ancestors. In 1789, the Medical Surgical School of Moscow and St. Petersburg had been renamed Imperial Medical Surgical Academy. They obtained the right to educate their own students and lead them to the doctoral degree together with Moscow University. At the Moscow Medical Surgical Academy, the former Bydlo School existed until 1804. Emperor Alexander closed it and transferred not only its 45 students but also all the medical instruments and the library to the Imperial Medical Surgical Academy, now the Military Medical Academy named SM Kirov in St. Petersburg. Only 2 education centers of medical science existed then: the Medical Faculty of the Moscow University and the Medical Surgical Academy in St. Petersburg. Emperor Alexander I especially developed a new charter for the Imperial Medical Surgical Academy. The library of the Military Medical Academy is the follow-up of the library of Pavel Kondoity. It contains the book collection of the Bydlo School and the private book collection of Herman Berhavi. It is a real treasure chest with a unique collection of old books in the field of medicine. In the middle of 18th century, Herman Berhavi's private collection of manuscripts moved with his nephews to Russia. Professor Pancras Hugenborn, himself a pathologist, is the first dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Leiden University, who in 2018, after almost 300 years, kept Hermann Berchowitz's book in his hands. Emperor Nicholas I, like his brother Alexander I, continued the education reform of their ancestors. They wanted to become more and more independent on foreign doctors. Russia, as a great European power, could not be left behind Europe after the war with Napoleon in 1812. Professor Ephraim Osipovich Mukin was dean of the medical faculty of the Imperial Moscow University, specialized in anatomy, surgery, traumatology, and physiology. He was one of the friends of the family Pirogov. He saw a talented student in young Nikolai Pirogov and encouraged him to study medicine. Young Nikolai, at the age of 13, wrote a request for university admission to study medicine. This was allowed, and so he started his studies just under 14 years old, despite the access age being 16 years. He was 17 years old when he graduated from Lomonosov University in Moscow, but found that the education had fallen short because of the old teaching method. He didn't see himself as full-fledged doctor. Emperor Nicholas I gave talented students from various departments of Russian university the opportunity to study abroad with a scholarship of the emperor. Young people, among them Nikolai Pirogov, were pre-selected by the professors at their universities. They had to pass a successful entrance exam to the Imperial Balto-German University of Dropo, now the Tartu University in Estonia. In Dropo, students could obtain a doctorate. After his postdoc study at the Balto-German University of Dropo, Nikolai Ivanovich was sent to Berlin to the Charity University. He also took the opportunity to study at the University of Göttingen. In May 1835, after his return from abroad, Pirogov was appointed as an extraordinary professor at the Balto-German University in Dorpat. It will be no longer an emperor or empress but Nikolai Pirogov who further reorganized medical education in the 19th century. He extended surgery from a craft to a science and contributed beyond the boundaries of surgery. He raised the medical skills in Russia to a level equal to the advanced countries of Europe. Pirogov spent 8 hours each day carrying out and analyzing anatomical experiments in addition to his clinical duties. During these experiments, he made at least 2 or 3 drawings of his dissections and believed this would be useful to surgeons in helping them during operations in patients. He published these experiments in an extensively illustrated atlas of arterial trunk and fascias in 1835. While waiting in St. Petersburg for the confirmation of this appointment, Pirogov gave over 6 weeks many anatomy demonstration in the mortuary of the Obukhov Hospital. He also gave a lecture to the Imperial Academy of Science about plastic surgery in general and about rhinoplasty in particular. Pirogov was not satisfied with the few possibilities concerning devices for administering anesthesia. As the technical director of the St. Petersburg Medical Tool Factory, he therefore designed and manufactured his own anesthesia devices, which he extensively used on the battlefield during the Caucasus War in 1847. While visiting the local meat market during the frigid winter of 1846, Pirogov noticed the frozen cut-open carcasses of pigs on display in a butcher's shop. The position of the internal organs of the animal were clearly visible. He realized that he could also use the cold Russian winter to freeze corpses to the density of the thickest wood, and then cut them into thin slices. This method would allow him to describe the topographical anatomy of the human body in detail never before attempted. Nikolai Pirogov was very interested in anatomy and its application in surgery. He specially made a textbook with full explanation, including anatomical images of the appearance and position of organs in the three main cavities of the human body. This atlas was initially intended for forensic doctors. Another atlas completed by him is a complete course on applied anatomy of human body, including color plates developed by him. Pirogov made in different cadavers a series of transverse, longitudinal, and anteroposterior cuts. On a cut frozen slice, a glass plate was placed on, and on this glass plate, a sheet of paper with rectangular grids was laid. An accurate drawing was then made of the frozen cut. This allowed the precise position and appearance of the different parts of the body to be recorded in their natural position on marble. Pirogov submitted the first page of his manuscript, an illustrated topographic anatomy of saw cuts made in 3 dimensions across the frozen human body in 4 volumes, to the Imperial Academy of Sciences of France in Paris. In a letter dated the 10th of August 1862, the French surgeon Felix Hippolyte Larrin, 1808-1895, member of the Paris Academy, praised the quality of the atlas. The topographical atlas was his last work on medical before he took part in the Crimean War from 1854-1856. The Crimean War 1853-1856 played a pivotal role in the development of humanitarian aid to the victims of warfare. Nikolai Pirogov and the great Duchess Yelena Pavlovna contributed mainly to this idea. Yelena Pavlovna married Grand Duke Mikhail Pavlovich Romanov in 1823. Sister-in-law of Emperor Nicholas I, she had easy access to him and the highest circles of the Russian and European society. Nikolai Pirogov first met Yelena Pavlovna in 1848 when he returned from the Caucasus War to St. Petersburg. She invited him to the Mikhailovsky Palace in the center of St. Petersburg to learn more about the conflict and its involvements. A long-lasting friendship developed. Shortly after the start of the Crimean War, report reaches St. Petersburg of untold numbers of wounded awaiting treatment in the open air in blood-soaked overcoats. In October 1854, Pirogov and Yelena Pavlovna discussed their medical plans to help the army in Sevastopol through the establishment of the Holy Cross community of nurses. Emperor Nicholas I granted his consent to their plans and appointed Pirogov as the overall head of the Army Medical Service. In the autumn of 1854, Yelena Pavlovna appealed to Russian women to train as nurses. Soon volunteers began to arrive and represented all sections of society. Most were well educated. The volunteers underwent a short few weeks intensive training at the St. Petersburg Imperial Medical Surgical Academy and other hospitals. They even attended operations carried out by well-known doctors, former pupils of Pirogov. They deal with the massive influx of injured Pirogov Institute and applied the use of triage. Pirogov divided the medical facility into 3 sections: dressing station directly at the front, a flying brigade, and emergency hospital some distance behind the front. The staff now knew how to perform triage with an improved, better outcome for the patients and serious victims. After the Crimean War, the nurses received the social recognition they deserved and more nursing communities were founded. The Holy Cross community of nurses are regarded as the model for the Russian Red Cross Nursing Society. The suffering Pirogov witnessed during the Crimea War profoundly influenced his outlook on life. His way of thinking changed more toward humanitarian goals and education. He made note for the first time a plea for an international treaty to guarantee the safety of volunteers who provided aid to war victims. Later, others like Henry Dunant would make similar pleas. Grand Duchess Elena Pavlovna had personal meetings in Switzerland with Henry Dunant, who is considered the founder of the Red Cross. She promised him to interest her nephews, Emperor Alexander II, and her other relatives. And the first meeting of the Russian Red Cross was organized in December 1866. In February 1867, Nikolai Pirogov was appointed privy, a counselor to the Russian Red Cross and to Empress Maria Alexandrovna. In the minutes, Nikolai Pirogov is mentioned as one of the original founders of the society. He developed his later days to advancing the cause of medical education in Russia and actively reported and constantly on European regional conflicts for the International Red Cross. Nikolai Pirogov received a lot of recognition for his contribution to the Red Cross. One of the organizations that appreciate the contribution to improve the situation of the war victims was the Belgian Red Cross. In the Bulletin International de Société de la Croix-Rouge of 1898, Frederick Ferriet, deputy of the Grand Council and the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, wrote in 1854, Grand Duchess Elena Pavlovna sent a detachment Sisters of Mercy, led by the famous surgeon Pirogov, to the Crimean War for help to the many wounded of all nationalities who had fallen under the walls of Sevastopol. He also states in the same magazine that the idea of the Red Cross community has its cradle in Russia, where it was first realized. In August 1987, the 12th International Medical Congress took place in Moscow and other cities in Imperial Russia. About 10,000 doctors from around the world attended the convention. Nikolai Ivanovich Pirogov was posthumously honored with a monument unveiled on the 3rd August of 1897 in the presence of many of these colleagues. Pirogov was an admirer of Hermann Boerhaave of Leiden University, but did not consider himself his equal. But was he right? Not so long ago, the Dutch flower board decided to honor 3 great physicians by naming a tulip after them. These 3 physicians are somehow not only connected by medicine and passion for their work, but also by the common Dutch-Russian medical history. The tulips carry the name Frederick Rouge, Dr. Boerhaave, and Nikolai Pirogov. Since 2018, with the support of the Anatoly Sobchak Foundation, the tie between the Military Medical Academy named SM Kirov, the Military Medical Museum, and Leiden University Medical Center, Leiden University, have been strengthened again by signing a renewed Memorandum of Understanding. This collaboration with other partners as well has already resulted in a beautiful joint project.